So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Fabian Huber from Simmons&Simmons in Munich. So to his education, he studied law at the universities of Regensburg, Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and also University of Augsburg. He has a master in addition, and also he did his PhD in medical law. He started his career in the area of life science. He was focusing there, and now he works, as I said, for Simmons&Simmons in Munich. And his main tasks are pharmaceutical and medical law, and there he's a special expert also for liability. And this is our next topic. So classification, liability, and insurance in terms of medical software.
Thank you very much. So welcome to my presentation. Thanks for coming. Today we're going to hear something about medical software classification, liability, and insurance. And first of all, I'm going to give you a small overview of today's session, starting with the importance of medical software today, because medical software has an important part in medicine, and every day new application possibilities are developed, and the possibilities seem to be unlimited. And on the one hand, this gives great opportunities, but also on the other hand, this bears risk. And these risks and difficulties and challenges are often linked to legal aspects. And for today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the legal framework of medical software, the qualification and classification of medical software, the liability and insurance. And first of all, I'm going to start with the legal framework. The regulation EU 2017-745, which is referred to the MDR, so the medical device regulation. It's the main document. It was introduced in May 2017, and it intends to stipulate the legal framework for medical device in whole, and is also meant to repeal some council directives, inter alia the medical device directive, so which is the Directive 9342 EEC, and it will be in force in May 2020, so there isn't much time left, and we have to focus and concentrate on the challenges and the consequences by the MDR. And having this said, we come to the point that we say, what role does medical software under the MDR plays? And it's obvious that the legislator had the chance to stipulate provisions with regard to the medical software in complete, to establish a complete framework, but he didn't use this chance, so he did not manage to sufficiently address the specificities of medical software. This is visible by not defining medical software at all, just having some references to medical software. And the statements are mainly limited to general statements about medical software, and there are only a few specific provisions with regard to medical software. So before we can qualify and classify the medical software, we have to talk about the classification, the qualification, sorry. And this is decisive for the question whether my medical software is a medical device or not. So the legislator says that a medical software is a medical device if it has one or more of the medical purposes stated in the definition of medical device. So we can say that the intended purpose of the manufacturer is decisive. This is given by Article 2, number 12 of the MDR, and the European Court of Justice said that even single modules of a software can have different purposes. So it's very important to look at the purpose stipulated by the manufacturer. And for example, we have no medical device if our software is intended for general purposes. Even when it's used in healthcare setting, or if it's intended for lifestyle products, or for well-being. And this is an important part to have a distinction here. And also medical software only intended for pure data storage or for lossless data compression or communication or what else, or simple search, is not meant to be a medical device. It falls not under the definition of medical device. And having said this, in general, there are 3 different types of medical softwares. Please note that this is very simplified because in practice there are a lot more of types. And in general, you can say there's standalone software, there's embedded software, and we have software which is an accessory to medical devices. And taking this into account, we come to the point where we say, okay, our medical software is a medical device. And having said this, we have to look how to classify our software. And before we can look at the rules, we have to look at the implementing rules, which says that medical software, which is intended to drive a device or to influence a device, or the use of a device, fall within the same class as the device. So we have a uniform classification, which means that we do not classify our medical software separately, but only the medical device. And in distinction to that, we have an independent software. So this would be the standalone software, which is classified in its own right. And then we have the classification of accessories, and accessories are also classified separately in their own right, so just like standalone software. And having said this, we come to the classification rules. There are a lot of rules in the Annex 8 of the MDR, and what we have learned from the definition section of the MDR, that medical software shall be deemed to be an active device. So not all of the rules are important, but only the rules for the active devices. And namely Rule 11, because Rule 11 addresses medical software. And here you can see the Rule 11, as Dr. Prince already said. It's very, very important, so I'm going to repeat it because it's decisive for the classification. And it says that medical software, which is intended to provide information, and the information which is used for diagnosis or therapeutic purposes, is classified in general as Class 2A. And other classifications can be made if such decisions have an impact which may cause death or a permanent deterioration of the person's state of health, then it's Class 3. And if it's not permanent, but a serious deterioration of a person's state of health, or which has a consequence of a surgical intervention, we have a Class 2B. And if our software is not intended to provide information, but to monitor physiological processes, then it's classified as Class 2A in general. Again, other classifications are possible if our software is intended for monitoring of vital physiological parameters, where the nature of variation of those parameters is such that it could result in immediate danger to the patient. In this case, it's Class 2B. And all other software not falling under these 2 general statements are classified as Class A. And we have here a decision scheme of Rule 11, and I will show it just for an overview, so not in detail because we heard it before from Dr. Prince. We have software which is intended to provide information, and if we say no, we come to the next slide. And if we say yes, we have to divide between a software which gives information which are used for a decision, and where this decision may cause death or permanent deterioration of a person's state of health, then we have Class 3, so the strictest class. If no, we have only serious deterioration of a patient's health, or which has a consequence of a surgical intervention, we have Class 2A. And if our medical software is not intended to provide information, we come to the point that we ask, is our medical software intended to monitor physiological processes? And also here we have other classification. For example, if it's intended to monitor vital physiological parameters, which could result in immediate danger to the patient, we have class 2B. And if not, we have class A. And for the next point, the liability, we have to look what the MDR contains on liability provisions. And unfortunately, the MDR only stipulates very limited rules on liability, e.g. Article 11, paragraph 5 of the MDR, which says that the authorized representatives jointly is liable with the manufacturer in specific cases, but that's it. But it's notable that in contrast to the Commission document 2012-542, it's a final document, the MDR stipulates a liability so that any national or legal person may claim compensation caused by a compensation for damage caused by a defective medical device in accordance with applicable union and national law. And the question is, what is meant by this? The union and national law are represented by the Directive 85/374 EEC. That's the Product Liability Directive, and it's referred to the PLD. And the German Act on Product Liability, the Produkthaftungsgesetz, which implements the PLD, and Section 823, Para 1 of the German Civil Code, which is the Produzentenhaftung. And the question was whether a simultaneous application of European law and German law is possible. And the MDR does not give hints on this, but the European Court of Justice decided in 2017 that they are both applicable simultaneously because the national law requires fold and provisions requiring fold are applicable besides provisions which contain a strict liability. So there's no problem. And the question is, what are the requirements for a liability under the MDR or the PLD or the Produkthaftungsgesetz? And it is required that medical software is a product. And product is defined as all movable things, even though incorporated into another movable or immovable thing. And also electricity is a product. But the PLD does not define what a thing is. So we have to look if we find the definition in other European laws, because PLD is an European law, but other European laws do also not define a thing. So we can have a look at the German national law, and we can make a reference to Section 90 of the German Civil Code, which refers to die Sache, Sacheigenschaft, and it says that things are corporeal objects, and decisive for corporeality is sensual perceptibility, spatial limitation, and controllability. And with regard to medical software, we can of course say that medical software is controllable because we say the software only performs processes which are given by the source code, and we are responsible for source code and can control the software. The sensual perceptibility is given or not given. One can argue about this, but the thing is we understand that it's not sensual perceptible because we say the source code can only be shown if you use other software to show the source code, or you need other software or hardware to see the processes coming out of the source code. So there's always a need for additional requirements to see, to make software perceptible. So we understand that medical software is not perceptible, but in the end, the answer is not relevant because we say the third requirement for being a corporeal object, the spatial limitation, is not given. The spatial limitation requires a physical limitation in a three-dimensional space. And medical software is limited insofar as we say the source code has a beginning and an end, but that's no physical limitation. So therefore, we say in itself, the source code or the medical software has no physical limitation. And the idea is to say, if we store our software on a device like a USB stick and DVD or in the cloud, could this deem the software to be spatial limited? And we think this is not a good answer or a good idea, because there are some follow-up questions which will arise with respect to the durability and the question, does it have to be saved locally or in the cloud? Is that sufficient? And the idea or the solution is to say, according to the law, the medical software is not a product because it is not spatial limited and therefore not a thing and therefore not a product. But that does not mean that we do not have any liability, but the liability will be according to section 823 German Civil Code, the Produzentenhaftung. And this works because the Produzentenhaftung means special rules on evidence. So it is not that much linked to the term product, and therefore we do not have the same understanding of product as we have under the Produkthaftungsgesetz or the Product Liability Directive. So therefore we can say that 823 German Civil Code is applicable. Having this said, and in case of any damage, we come to the point liability, upcoming developments. And it is obviously that more and more medical software will be developed. Nearly every day new applications arise, application possibilities arise. And it is also foreseeable that medical software will be more complex in a technical or in a digital way. And the European Commission recognized this and asked the question whether the legal framework of the Product Liability Directive is still effective, although it was introduced in 1985. And in 2018, the European Commission made an evaluation, and the result was that the PLD is still effective in general. However, and that's what the European Commission acknowledged, is that the PLD was introduced in 1985, and it was not possible to foresee all developments, and it was also not foreseeable that definitions are understood differently nowadays. So therefore, the European Commission decided to introduce guidances to the Product Liability Directive in mid-2019, taking into account the new developments. These guidelines or guidances are still not yet published. We expect them to be published end of June or July. And we also expect that the European Commission will stipulate new definition. At least we expect the EU Commission to state that software will fall under the Product Liability Directive. And coming to the insurance point, the MDR stipulates that manufacturers have to have measures in place to provide sufficient financial coverage in respect of a potential liability under the PLD. And remember what I said before. We said that medical software is not a corporal thing, and it's not a product, and consequently, one have to say that there is no potential liability under PLD. However, we strongly recommend our clients to have such financial coverage in place just for precautionary measures, because it could be the case that the authorities have different understandings of a product, so they can say as long as the medical software is stored anywhere, just like a local or an cloud-based storage, this is a product because it's physically limited. And also we expect developments by the European Commission with regard to the PLD guidance. And at least for the sake of safety and sustainability, we strongly recommend to have a financial coverage in this regard. And the question is, what kind of financial coverage is sufficiently? The MDR does not stipulate any information on this. So a conceivable kind of financial coverage might be a product liability insurance. That's the basis. Or we have an indemnity or warranty obligation by financial institute. And also it is not stipulated what's the maximum amount or the maximum sum of such financial coverage. In the German Act on Pharmaceutical Products, we have such maximum amount. And because the MDR does not stipulate anything, we refer to the Product Liability Directive, which says that member states are able to stipulate such a maximum amount. And the German legislator did this in Article 10 of the Produkthaftungsgesetz, and it says it's with 85 million euros. So in any case, regardless of the maximum amount, the financial coverage has to be proportionate to the risk class, the type of device, and to the size of the enterprise, so the size of the company. And with regard to the risk class, that's nothing else than the classification. So if you have a class 3 medical device, then the financial coverage has, as a general rule, to be higher than for a class 1 device. And this is due to the fact that one can say the higher the class, the higher the financial coverage has to be, because a higher class indicates a higher risk potential. With regard to the type of device, you cannot look at the class, because class is a special aspect for financial coverage, is covered by the risk class. So type of device can only mean such factors which are not covered by the class, and that is functionality, the type of application, and previous experience with similar products. You can say that new products, digital products, or complex products have a high risk potential, because you cannot foresee any consequences. There are unpredictable difficulties can appear. So therefore, this is also an aspect for financial coverage. Lastly, the size of the enterprise. This is not meant to be understood as a big company can have a high financial coverage, but more than you say the sales numbers of the specific product are decisive. This is due to the fact that the sales numbers can be within a small company or a big company, and there is no reason for saying that a big company with small sales numbers has to have a high financial coverage. But in the end, all these three aspects have to be taken into an overall consideration, and you do not have to use a rigid application of each of them, and they can also change during the lifetime of a product. So when it's changed, you have to adjust the final coverage to some. The MDR does also not stipulate which person is responsible for the financial coverage assessment. So we understand that the person responsible for regulatory compliance meant or addressed in Article 15 can be such person, but in the end it is not clear and have to be assessed in the practice. Also, the MDR does not stipulate any provisions with regard to authorities' surveillance of the financial coverage. So this could be the case. There's a one-time surveillance when providing the respective information at the time when the manufacturers are registrating. So this is given by Article 31 MDR. Also, it is conceivable that there are periodic audits of sufficient financial coverage by competent authorities. But in any case, we advise our clients to have complete documentation by manufacturers, So because we say a documentation might minimize the liability in case of unpredictable developments, because the authorities can see the rationale for our coverage, and this could be very helpful. And after having said all of this information, one can say that the MDR is a good start also to address medical software, although the MDR does not stipulate specific provisions with regard to medical software, or although the MDR does not contain a complete framework for medical devices. And therefore, we cannot do anything else as being prepared, look at the challenges, and await the practice. And yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. And if you have some question, please feel free to ask.